I looked down and I kind of saw my skin and I saw my hands. And it was the first time I really realized, I was like, oh, I'm not like all of you. Because everybody else in that circle was white. And I was the only person of these 15 people of color. My heart just sank into my stomach. I became deeply confused in that moment. It was like Crayolas in a Crayola box just became visible to me. And I was like, I don't fit in here. I don't belong. And I have no business even being attracted to or liking a white woman because I am not of that color. Peace, peace, peace. What's up, my friends? Welcome back to the Everlutionary Podcast. I am your host, Hawah Kasat. So grateful to have all of you back again for another episode. I'm here every 2 weeks and I drop a new episode every 2 weeks. Today is the solo cast. That's right. It's me and you. I'm just here talking to myself for the next half an hour. That's what I do every third episode, where I take a moment to reflect on all the things that I've been learning and exploring with the guests, and then just have a chance for some deeper understanding of why I'm here, right? So I feel like important to me in this process is for listeners to know why I'm showing up and why I invite the guests that I invite to the show. Why am I right now in the middle of producing a series on anti-racism and the work of decolonization? Why am I doing that? So for those that have been tuning in and tapping in, you know right now you're on the fourth episode of this mini series. And if this is the first episode you've heard in a while and you haven't tapped back, I would really encourage you to go back at least the last 3 episodes where we really set the frame for colonization and anti-racism work. And there's a really deep arc to this programming right now where we're peeling back the layers and we're really trying to understand the moment that we live in and how the moment we live in is so deeply influenced and impacted by the power and the privilege that comes with being of a certain identity in the world. So, you will be having a chance to hear today a bit about my story, a little bit more about my background, and some of the childhood experiences that have brought me to this moment of creating a podcast and speaking on these topics in particular. And my hope is that some of the exploration today will create a deeper understanding for listeners on what internalized racism is and what internalized oppression is, and how the shame and the discomfort that arises from that experience really can drastically impact somebody's life. In that process, I hope I'll be able to put into some of my own storytelling a deeper lens to the last few episodes, which have been really about decolonizing wealth and understanding white settler colonialism and what the role of solidarity is in movement building. So, my stories today are meant to bring you closer to me and my heart, a chance for you to get to know me a little bit better as your host, and a chance for us to dive deeper into the ways that racism can impact individuals on a personal level. So, we're going to get into it. And thanks for tuning back in. The first part of where I wanted to begin today was like reflecting on my own childhood a little bit. I was born in a small white suburban town in central New Jersey, born in a town which had a handful of people of color. And being somebody whose racial identity was often in the spotlight. And when I say that, I mean most of my friend groups and most of the circles that I was in and hanging out in, they were normally circles that did not have a lot of brown or black people in them. And in that way, my identity as a person of color was often put under a microscope. And it began really early, right? So for me, in grade school, when I was in, I remember, I think it was like fourth grade when I first actually really understood for the first time that I was of a different color skin than all of my peers. This might sound kind of crazy, but really up until this point in like fourth grade, I really didn't understand or notice how the color of my skin was something that other people noticed as different than theirs. So I was kind of wandering around the hallways and the classrooms in third and fourth grade, just kind of oblivious to the fact that I was not white. So one of my best friends at that time, he had a quote unquote girlfriend. And as you would be in fourth or fifth grade, like boyfriend, girlfriend. But my friend, who I'm not going to name here on the podcast, and today I'm not going to use any names for any of the people that I'm speaking about. My friend, he had asked me, like, hey, who do you think is cute? Who do you think is cute in the class? You got a crush on somebody? And I was always pretty shy anyway, always been shy, still am pretty shy even to this day in these ways. And I remember not really wanting to share or like disclose anything. And I remember even not even being sure about my feelings and not even sure, wait, do I have a crush on somebody? Is there somebody in this class, in my class that I think is cute? So I had to think about it. But I remember like just being like, oh, I don't know. It's not something I want to talk about. And then my friend, he kept pressing me on it for like days, like day after day. He kept asking me over and over again, "Hey, is there somebody you like?" And by that point, like a week later, I started tracking, and I kind of did. There was somebody in the class who I did think was attractive. And at lunchtime one day, I finally told him. I told him, but I told him under full confidence. I said, "Hey, look, I'm going to tell you, but whatever you do, you cannot tell anybody that I think this person is cute." He, of course, said, "Of course, I got you. Like, I'm not going to tell anybody. This is just between me and you. I'm just so curious." So I told him that I thought this person was cute. And that was that. And then after we just finished eating lunch, and then we went outside to play kickball outside for recess, which we always did. And after we were done playing kickball, I remember going to the bathroom. And recess is kind of that time where people were like all running around outside in the fields. And then I remember coming back, and me and my friend, we got split up, and we had played kickball together, and then we got split up, and I ended up going back to the classroom by myself, probably like a little bit later or 10 minutes later. So I walk down the hall, I get back to the classroom, and I get into the classroom. And as I walk into the classroom, I see huddled in the back right corner, like what felt and looked like to me like 70, 80% of all the kids in my class. This was a class of probably about 20 kids. And there was at least like 14 or 15 of them huddled in like a circle. I heard them snickering, I heard them laughing. And I walk into the door, and normally, because I was always very athletic, so in most ways, people that tend to be a little bit more physically able and privileged, we tend to get a little bit more airtime. There used to be a little bit more popularity. So I was kind of used to just like hanging out and being friends with everybody. I was fairly outgoing. So I walk in and I see people hanging out in the corner. I'm like, oh, I wonder what's going on. So let me walk over there. So I start to walk over towards that side of the classroom to see what people were laughing about. And as I get closer, the circle kind of opens up. And as the circle opens up, I see my best friend at that time, who I'd shared earlier at lunch, who I thought was cute in the class. I shared with him that information. He kind of like was standing there. And then I saw his girlfriend standing next to him. And I just kind of saw all these eyes on me, and they're all looking at me really intensely. And then his girlfriend kind of steps out and steps forward, and she asks me in front of everybody, she says, "Hey, so we heard you think," I'm not going to say her name, "but we heard you think this girl is cute. You can't like her, because if you like her, if you guys ever had a baby, it would come out half black and half white." And as she says that, the other students, my classmates, my peers, they start all snickering and laughing. And I'm just standing there pretty dumbfounded. I'm just completely shocked. I didn't really understand what was happening, but I remember scanning as she said that. I remember scanning around. I see my friend's eyes, who looking at me, and kind of like, I couldn't tell if he was smiling or not, but then I just kind of felt like really vulnerable with him, and I felt betrayed. I felt deep betrayal because I'd shared with him this information in confidence, and he had shared it with his girlfriend, who then shared it with the rest of the class. And then I look over and I actually see right next to the girl who said that to me, I see the person who I actually thought was cute and that I was attracted to. And it was interesting because in her eyes, I actually saw a little bit of sadness and I saw some kind of like pity for me or remorse. I couldn't really tell exactly, but those are all the things that I felt and saw. And then inside of me, I just felt like I looked down and I kind of saw my skin and I saw my hands. And it was the first time I really realized, I was like, oh, I'm not like all of you. Because everybody else in that circle was white. And I was the only person of these 15 people that I remember that was not white. I was the only person of color. And my heart just sank into my stomach. I became deeply confused in that moment. It was like the Crayolas in a Crayola box just became visible to me. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't fit in here. I don't belong. And oh, wow, I have no business even being attracted to or liking a white woman because I am not of that color. And I just remember looking to the left. I remember looking to the left at that point, like just kind of searching for like some ground. And I saw the teacher in the left corner behind her desk, and she kind of looked up. I feel like she must have heard everything that happened. And I just remember meeting eyes with her for a moment, and she seemed confused as well as to like how to engage or what to say. And then I just turned around and I ran out of the classroom and I ran down the hall crying. And that was my first experience with really understanding color. And from that moment on, set forward a series of moments in my life of what I would call internalized racism. Because for the rest of my life, I mean, this was at a time when I was probably like 10 years old. For the rest of my life, from that point on, I had been very uncomfortable in sharing any feelings I may have for another person because of fear of rejection. But even more importantly, I had been always very uncomfortable and walking on eggshells around white women in particular because of this experience of being singled out as someone who couldn't be with a white woman because our baby would come out half black and half white, which was fascinating because nobody was even thinking about babies then, right? I was not, that's for sure. I was a baby myself. So that was my first experience to understanding color. That was my first experience to understanding that I should be really careful with who I share my feelings with, even. And from that moment forward, I internalized this shame and this sense of, I'm not sure if I belong. So that was moment one. And I want to kind of like, I want to speak to internalized racism in this way because to internalize this for me as a young person, it's something that had continued to impact me for probably decades to go, right? So like that was the beginning of a decade, multiple decades long work of unraveling what was the trauma of being marginalized because of the color of my skin. Marginalized in a way where I don't belong, I don't fit in, and I'm not sure where I do. So I want to fast forward just a little bit. I remember about 2 years later, in about it's probably sixth grade, when I was at soccer practice. I mean, soccer was my life at this point. By the time I was in sixth grade, I loved playing soccer. I was a goalkeeper, by the way, for my soccer people out there. I was definitely a deeply committed goalkeeper. That was my position. And I was on a soccer team with, again, I think there was two other people of color on my soccer team at that time in sixth grade, maybe one, and everybody else was white, right? I grew up in a white suburban town. So on the soccer team, there was a tendency for a few people on the team to consistently use derogatory words and comments like racist language against me throughout all of our practices, our games. It would be regular for me to have to endure racist comments on the soccer field. I got everything, all the racial slurs, I got them. All the racial jokes, I was the butt of them, right? So I was a recipient of them. And I also want to name that there was multiple people on my soccer team, people that I'm still friends with today who are white, who never participated in that and who I had never personally heard them repeating or making those same racial slurs to me as the few people that on the team did. So I do want to lift that up that there were friends in my life at that time who were white and are white, and they're still my friends today who had never made me feel that way, and who had never attacked me or verbally abused me because of my race or my identity or even like the religion of my parents. So I want to name that. So here we are at soccer practice, and it was halftime at soccer practice, and people were eating snacks and oranges or whatever and drinking water. And I was standing on the side about 15 feet away. My teammates, a group of my peers and teammates were kind of circled and laughing and talking about things. And I overheard them. I overheard one of them in particular, who was one of the ringleaders of let's get up on Hawah and let's make fun of Hawah about something, curry, food, dot head, all the racial derogatory slurs you could think of that people would throw at brown or black people at that time. And I overheard him like saying to a group of the kids, like, hey, I was just at the mall over the weekend and I heard this family in the mall and they were speaking like Chinese, and he started making fun of the Chinese language and doing kind of what young kids do, mimicking the language in a way that was really passive aggressive and derogatory. And to everyone, he says, those people should not be in America if they can't speak English. And if you're not going to speak English, then you don't belong here and you should get out of the country and you should leave the country. So I overhear him say this. And as I'm standing there listening, and then all of course, like a lot of the kids start laughing at what he's saying and his sort of ability and the way that he's making fun of the Chinese language, or Mandarin at that point was probably what he was trying to speak to. And I kind of connect some dots at that moment because my mom spoke to me in Hindi. And my mom often spoke to me in Hindi in public spaces, whether that was in the mall, whether that was at soccer games, whether that was coming to school to pick me up. She would speak to me in Hindi. And even though I was born here in the United States and I was born in New Jersey, I did spend frequent parts of my childhood visiting India and going to Mumbai and being in India throughout long parts of my childhood, long months in the summers, during summer vacation. I remember going to India. So I had a deep connection at that point to India, to the people, the culture, the traditions, to my family members that were there. And my mom is an immigrant who, frankly, at that point, didn't speak English that great. I mean, she spoke English, but she'd started learning English when she was 18 years old. So, she was not fully fluent in all the ways that we are as native born speakers. So I kind of connect the dots and I realize in that moment, oh, wow, when my mom gets here to pick me up from soccer practice, she's going to walk out of the car. She's going to come to the field where I am, and she's going to start speaking to me in Hindi, which is the national language of India. When I know in that moment, I'm like, yeah, that's just another reason for the kids on my team to make fun of me when I'm gone. They're going to say the same thing about me. Like, why should Hawah be in America? Hawah doesn't belong in America. He doesn't speak English. He's out here speaking Hindi with his mom. As a young kid, I think there's probably nothing more important in our lives than the desire to want to belong. And if you're more curious about this, I encourage you to listen to episode 1 of my podcast on belonging. Go back and listen to episode 1 on belonging. It's an incredible episode about belonging. And in this moment, that survival instinct of wanting to belong, the desire to belong, was so strong that I just knew that I had to fit in. Because if I don't fit in, I'm going to keep being marginalized and I'm going to keep being made fun of. And I have a lot of compassion for myself. I was so young. I didn't know any better. I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to belong. So after the second half of soccer practice, we're all packing up. And I see my mom pull up. I see our car come up to the side of the road and I grab my bag And before my mom can even get out of the car, I grab my bag, I say bye and I run to the street so my mom can't even get close to the team or get close to me and my friends. And as my mom sees me, she starts speaking to me in Hindi. And I remember so clearly, like it was yesterday, I remember screaming at her and yelling at her and demanding that she does not speak to me in this language. Whatever you do, don't speak to me in Hindi. I don't want to hear this language. I don't want you to talk to me in this language. I'm not going to respond in this language. And I was so angry. I was so mad. And I felt so much shame and desire to be distant from the cultures and the traditions and the people of which my ancestors come from. And my mom didn't really know what was going on because I actually don't think I told her until years and years later why I decided not to speak Hindi anymore. But in that process, in the process of internalizing racism, I lost the language because I had basically at that time started to refuse to speak back in Hindi. And when my mom spoke in Hindi, sometimes I would even ignore her and I would make her speak to me in English, forcing her to learn English. If some of this is sounding familiar from what we talked about in the last episode with decolonizing wealth around the zombie invasion and colonization, the way colonization works and even racism works is it forces people to become a part of the dominant culture. And so this was me having to assimilate to the dominant culture, but it also was me feeling so much shame around my cultural heritage. That stayed with me for another 8 or 9 years because this was sixth grade. And it wasn't until my sophomore year, junior year of college, when I finally started realizing and learning in classes in college that there is a such thing as internalized racism. And this is how it can impact you psychologically and emotionally. And this is how it was impacting me. So I stopped speaking Hindi and I basically refused to speak Hindi and I forgot all of that language. And basically, I had to spend a lot of my years after college going back to India and reclaiming the language, reclaiming my heritage, right? Going back and deeply desiring to learn how to speak the language again. That was like me coming back into my own and healing from that internalized racism. But for the next 10 years of my life, I lived with a lot of shame about being Indian. So that is kind of the way internalized racism operates on the hearts, on the psyche, on the emotional body of people, right? Now, with these two stories, what I can do is create a little bit of arc for you to get to know me better, right? What you know about me now as your host of a show is that racism deeply impacted my life. These two stories I'm sharing with you are two stories of hundreds of stories that I can't get into right now, but these are the two salient stories that come to my mind when I think about my relationship to the world, my relationship to other people, and my relationship to myself. There is a part of this story, though, that's really, really beautiful that I think is so important because I know at this time, I know in the times that we live in, there seems like there's so little hope. So I want to kind of like illuminate for y'all a little bit about the neighborhood that I lived in. So the third part of my experience of racism in childhood was I grew up in a cul-de-sac in this town in New Jersey, and the cul-de-sac was actually incredibly diverse. There was me, who was a brown person with Indian ancestry, South Asian. There was a black person who was older than me by about 4 years, and he was in the neighborhood as well. And then there was a Jewish family, and one of my best friends at that time of childhood was Jewish. And I'd often go to his house for like Friday Shabbat dinners, and his parents loved me and took me in, and I'd be at his house all the time with his brother and so we would all be hanging out together. And then there was also like an Italian family, there was a Polish family, there was an Irish family. I mean, it was just like, it was crazy. And all of us, probably all the young boys, I was the youngest of probably about 7 young boys in the neighborhood that played a lot together and would play sports together. We would play basketball together. We'd play baseball and football together in the neighborhood because you just walk out the house and you just come together and you play. And so in that neighborhood, one of the people in particular, multiple, but really one of them, I'm not going to say his name, but he was the tallest. He was about 2 years older than I was. And he was just mean. I mean, he was so mean. He was a white Italian man of European ancestry who every time I saw him, whether it was on the school bus, whether we were playing basketball, whether we're playing football, whatever it was, he would always just make fun of me for being Indian. And I mean, the comments, the racial slurs were just never ending. And I just braced for it. I knew every time I went out to play with all these kids, I knew that I was going to be the subject to these racial jokes. And it wasn't just me. This person in particular, we'll just call him Ted for now. We'll call him Ted. He was like 6'2". He was like tall and big. He was the biggest kid in the neighborhood also. He was just a bully. He was a bully. And he would also make horrendous anti-Semitic jokes towards one of my best friends who was Jewish. He would make really mean comments to the person who was black, although his comments towards the black boy was less because I think that he was older than him and there was some power dynamic there that I'm not fully aware of, but like for some reason there was a respect there that he didn't exploit. And then he'd also make fun of like the other kids in the neighborhood, but mainly me and my friend who's Jewish, we were the two people that were constantly receiving all of the hatred, all of the hatred. This went on for years, y'all. I mean, this went on from the time that I started playing with these boys who were all older than me because they were in 8th grade. I was in 6th grade probably when I started playing with them. And it went on until they graduated from high school. So until probably my junior year of high school, I would be receiving and being a part of all these racial slurs and violence. All this racial violence was very much a descriptor of my childhood. So fast forward, he's gone, he goes to college. I graduate from high school. I go to college. I'm in college. I go to Washington, D.C. I moved to D.C. and I'm living in D.C. And I'd come back to New Jersey to visit my parents every 4 or 5 months, maybe for the holidays, for Thanksgiving. And I get home from college one week. And normally when I would go home, I would run. I'd love to run around the neighborhood. Lived in a cul-de-sac. I like to jog. So I'd go running around the neighborhood. And I always remember kind of like freezing up and like my body would tighten when I would go home and I would run because whenever I passed his house, I would have this visceral feeling of like, oh my God, I don't want to see him. I don't want him to see me. I don't want to have to deal with that energy. So this was, I think, the end of my sophomore year of college. And I was running around the neighborhood and I passed his house. And as always, like I have like that, my body would kind of tense up, but I got past his house and I'm like 2 or 3 houses down, continuing to run. And I start hearing my name and I hear somebody yell my name once really loud. And I kind of like, somebody just yelled my name. Wondered what that was. And I hear my name again being yelled. And I kind of realize the way that my name is being yelled, I can understand and recognize the voice that this is that person. He is here. He just saw me. I was like, oh damn. I was like, I don't want to have to deal with this. I was like, I'm so tired of this. I'm just ignoring it. And I'm just running. I just keep running and I'm like, maybe I'll just ignore it. I'll be able to get away. I don't have to, deal with whatever he's got to say to me. But I can tell that he's not going away because his voice is not getting further away because he's running after me and he's yelling my name. So finally, at this point, I'm like, you know what? I've been taking so much shit from this kid for so long. I'm going to turn around. I'm going to face him. And I'm older now. I feel more confident in my life. I've learned a lot about racism through college, through new friends, through being embraced by my community in DC. So I stop and I turn around and I see him. And he's like, gets like 10 feet away from me. He's like, hey, hey. It's like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, I'm doing all right. I'm just jogging. I'm like, what's going on? What do you need? What do you want? And he's like, hey, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm so glad I saw you. I've been thinking so much about you. You know, I don't know if you know this, but I went away. I joined the military for a couple years. I was overseas and, I'm back and I learned so much and I've realized so much. And I can't believe what an asshole I've been to you for, our whole childhood. He's like, I was so mean. I was so horrible. I'm so sorry. And I'm just in shock. I don't even know what to do. I am completely frozen and in disbelief. And he's like, hey, I had some revelations while serving overseas. And I just like met a lot of people that are of color that like helped me see how racist I've been and how incredibly prejudiced and violent I've been throughout all of our childhood. And I just been thinking about you a lot because I know you didn't deserve any of that. You didn't deserve any of what I did and how I treated you was wrong. Whew. Yeah. I never expected that moment. I never expected him to say those words to me. I never imagined him changing his behavior, changing his perspective, and changing his relationship to me as a person, as a human, to see me as a human, to not see me as somebody who's not white or from a different country than his family may have come from, but to see me just as somebody with feelings. And I received it and I said something. I can't even really remember exactly what I said. I probably said, wow, like, thanks. Like, I don't know. That means a lot to me. We probably talked for like 5 or 10 more minutes. I don't think we talked for that much longer. I think he just really needed to get that off of his chest. And I, yeah. And then we said goodbye. And he walked back to his house and I kept jogging the other direction. And what's interesting is, I think a few months later, I'd come back on another visit and I saw a for sale sign outside of his house. And I think his whole family had relocated and moved. So if I didn't see him when I saw him, he might never not have ever had the opportunity to apologize to me. And I would never have received the opportunity to receive his apology. And wow, when I think about hope, right? Like I know Charlie Kirk was just murdered. And I know that there's a lot of people on the sides of what are opposite perspectives of how politically we should be moving in this country or world that are talking about civil war and violence and racial violence. And there's all these threats that take place and that have taken place and are taking place towards Black universities, historically Black colleges and universities. And just the racial dynamics in this country are really intense. And I have this experience from childhood. I had this experience in my early 20s, which gives me a lot of hope in the midst of discussions and talks about civil war. It gives me hope. And when I think about the murder of Charlie Kirk and those that are still getting to know my voice and know who I am in the world, I don't condone violence. It's horrible that this person had to die and be murdered, regardless of what he's talking about or his values or his, opinions or what he's debating. No matter what, there's no reason that somebody needs to die for that. And so I'm really sad that moment has caused even a greater rift in our ability to heal as people. But I share these stories with all of you today because I think maybe it'll give you a little bit more understanding of who I am and the things, the experiences that have shaped me and why I do care so much about healing and reconciliation and why I actually do believe it's possible. Although I do believe it's a lot of hard work. It's going to be a lot of hard work, and it's going to require dialogue, and it's going to require education. And we have to have these conversations in our schools. We have to, at a young age, be working in these skills and building these skills of acceptance and tolerance and the ability to overcome our xenophobia and our prejudice and our racism, right? That happens with time, and it happens through constructive, structured effort. I know that there could be a feeling or a sense that, some people feel like they're really, they should feel guilty or feel bad, but I just really want to keep uplifting that we're all here for a reason, and that no matter what the color of your skin, you have an important role to play in that healing. And for me, healing is not just about brown and black people healing, but it's about white people healing too. And so when I think about this moment of apology, I think about the healing that he was able to receive by seeing me again and seeing me as a human and apologizing, like just how that must have felt really liberating for him too. And I want him to be liberated. I want to be liberated. We all want to be free. And I think that is really what it comes down to. This work, it's not for one group of people over another group of people. I haven't been talking about decolonization for the last 3 episodes because I want white people to become oppressed or of a lower class or economic status. That's not it. It's really about seeing our humanity and becoming on the same level and having equity and equality as the fabric of our institutions. And that to me is what this work is about. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm still doing a podcast. That's why I'm curating these series on anti-racism and decolonization and healing. So I appreciate you for tuning in. As always, think about your own lives. Think about who in your life could use a little bit of healing, right? And so that might mean that there's somebody in your life, and this doesn't have to be racially motivated either. You might not have been mean to somebody because of their race or their religion. Maybe there was something else that happened. Maybe you were really, really mean to somebody because of some other thing that took place, and you can reflect on that right now. Maybe there's a way to create some healing. Maybe there's a message you can send, a letter you can write. We can go back to the episode called Becoming a Good Relative and think about writing your own letter just to yourself. Begin the process of alchemizing that hatred and turn it into compassion, turn it into love, and turn it into repair. So that's my wish. That's my hope for us. That's my hope for us as people. And if any of this has moved you, if any of this has given you some inspiration, please consider doing something really small, like sharing the episode with a friend through a text message or through an email. Drop it into your e-newsletter. This work, these dialogues, these conversations, I think they're critical for this moment. And the only way that we can change the cultural narrative, the way we change the story, is by creating space for these news stories. So thanks for tuning in. As always, thanks for tapping in and being a part of the show. And over the next couple of episodes, we'll continue the work on anti-racism and decolonization. Until then, go in peace, go in love. Aho, Hawah Kasat.